Hello, and welcome back to Veil Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales veiled in noir, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1, I don't know if I really believe in ghosts. When I casually mention that Ruby's Antiques is haunted, most people picture the usual stuff. Pale figures drifting between shelves, angry spirits tied to old objects, voices whispering from the corners. They imagine dead people who never moved on, stuck to a pocket watch, or a wedding ring, or a cracked mirror. But Ruby's Antiques isn't haunted by ghosts. At least, I wouldn't call what lives there ghosts. Ruby's Antiques is haunted in the same way a person can be haunted after surviving something terrible. Like the building itself went through an accident it never recovered from. The fear doesn't float through the air in a dramatic way. It sinks into the wallpaper. It clings to the scuffed floors. It sits on the furniture and the displays like a layer of dust you can never fully wipe away. Strange things have happened there for as long as I've worked there, but nothing had ever felt truly dangerous. Not until a few weeks ago. That day started like every other day. I'm the only employee, so I opened the shop myself, using the heavy brass key and flipping the hand-painted sign in the window from closed to... There's only one window, and sometimes it feels like the building doesn't want people looking in. The owner is an older woman named Mrs. Rutledge. I've met her in person exactly once. She hired me, told me the basics, and then disappeared back into whatever life she has outside the store. She lets me set my own hours, which sounds great on paper, but it means the shop can open any time between sunrise and sunset, depending on how I'm feeling. Looking back, that should have been my first clue that this place wasn't normal. But I needed the job badly enough to ignore the red flags, desperate times, and all that. Once I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, I did what I always do before I even sat down at the register. I walked straight to the music section. Ruby's Antiques has records, a ridiculous number of them. A collection that looks impossible, like it's been growing for 100 years without anyone ever throwing anything out. I tried counting them once. I gave up after 3 days because I had barely made progress, and I started feeling like the shelves were rearranging themselves behind my back. We also have an old gramophone in perfect condition, the kind you'd expect to see in a museum display. Somehow, it still works. Its music carries through the entire store, soft but clear, like the building was designed to spread sound. I picked out a record that looked safe. That's the best way to describe it. Safe. I've learned not to choose anything too strange looking. Not to get curious about labels written in languages I can't place, and definitely not to play the ones that feel wrong when I touch them. Some of the songs in that collection can't be found anywhere else, and weirdly enough, my regular customers love that. They come in and ask what's playing, like Ruby's Antiques is some kind of hidden jazz club instead of a cramped antique store that smells like old fabric and varnish. The needle dropped with a soft crackle. A warm voice filled the room, backed by smooth brass. It wasn't a song I recognized, but it had that familiar old-time richness that made it feel comforting anyway. Satisfied, I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and went to the register. My chair made the same worn leather sound it always did when I sat down. The gold-colored desk lamp buzzed before it lit up, like it was annoyed at being asked to work. Then the day officially began. The morning stayed quiet. My first customers were a mother and her young son. I didn't recognize them, which isn't unusual. People wander into Ruby's Antiques by accident sometimes. They come in curious and leave looking unsettled, like they can't explain what made them uncomfortable. The kid dragged his mom straight to the doll section. I hate the doll section. Everyone who works there would hate it, if there was anyone else working there. Something about that corner of the store is always darker than it should be, even when the lights are on. The dolls themselves change constantly. I don't mean we get new stock in. I mean, I'll look at a shelf one day and see a row of familiar faces. And the next day, those dolls are gone and a whole new set has replaced them. Like they walked away and different ones wandered in. Half an hour later, the mother and son came back to the register, holding a porcelain doll I had never seen before. It was chubby and glossy, with painted cheeks and an open smile. It had too many teeth, not like sharp monster teeth, just too many, like someone had painted the mouth wrong and never fixed it. The boy was thrilled, hugging it like it was the best thing he'd ever found. His mother looked like she was trying to be polite, while her instincts screamed at her to drop it and run. I put on my customer service smile and rang them up as fast as possible. I didn't want that doll near me for a second longer than necessary. After they left, the shop stayed empty for a while. Closer to noon, one of my regulars came in. Mr. Callahan. Everyone else calls him Cal. I don't. I don't know why I can't bring myself to do it. Maybe because the first time he corrected me, the look in his eyes made me feel like I was being tested. And I failed. And now I'm stuck in the formal version forever. He came in wearing his usual battered baseball cap, pulled low, flannel shirt smeared with grease and dust. He looked like he'd just crawled out from under a car. "Good morning, Mr. Callahan," I said, watching him head toward the back of the store like he always did. He lifted his chin and stared at me. Even under the shadow of his cap, his eyes were sharp and heavy, like they could pin you to a wall. "How many times do I gotta tell you, kid?" "Just call me Cal." I gave my usual small shrug. "Store policy," I lied. The way I always. It was easier than admitting it was my own weird hang-up. "If you'd like to register a complaint, I can put you in contact with Mrs. Rutledge." His whole body shifted. That name changed something in his expression. No thanks. Don't need to get her involved." And then he moved away quickly, like he'd said too much. I watched him go, feeling that familiar mix of curiosity and unease. I liked talking to Mr. Callahan more than I probably should, and not just because he was one of the only consistent human presences in that store. He felt grounded. Normal, like if anything truly bizarre happened, he might be the only person there who wouldn't pretend it was fine. I ate lunch behind the register, a ham and cheese sandwich thrown together that morning when I was half awake and a little hungover from a night out that hadn't even been fun enough to justify the headache. 2 unfamiliar customers came in and bought a nice pair of earrings and a rickety old chair that looked like it would collapse the second someone sat in it. I let them pay and leave without warning them. At Ruby's Antiques, people buy what they buy. I was debating whether I should go find Mr. Callahan and see what he was doing in the back when my phone buzzed on the desk. I flipped it over and felt my stomach drop. Mrs. Rutledge, her name, sat on my screen like a threat, And her contact photo wasn't anything I remembered choosing. It was a close-up shot of twisting rose bushes, thorny and dark, like something you'd see outside an old cemetery. I answered quickly. "Mrs. Rutledge, how may I help you?" "Oliver, sweetheart," she rasped. Her voice always sounded like she smoked a pack a day and washed it down with gravel. "A friend of mine is coming in to pick up a special order. You'll be there for him, won't you?" A cold heaviness settled in my chest. Special order meant basement. Of course, Mrs. Rutledge, she let out a laugh that wasn't really a laugh. It was harsh and cracked, like something breaking. "That a boy. Should be labeled with her name. Got it?" Before I could ask who I was looking for, the line went dead. I stared at my phone for a second, then set it down like it had burned me. All special orders were kept in the basement. Ruby's Antiques has a basement that never behaves the same way twice. Some days it's damp and moldy. Other days it's so dry you can taste dust in the air. The lights flicker no matter what. The spacing between them never feels right. And there's always that faint, sour smell drifting up from somewhere deeper. I hated going down there. I also knew there was no point arguing. If Mrs. Rutledge wanted something retrieved, it got retrieved. I put up the small sign that said I'd stepped away from the register and moved into the aisles. I wasn't worried about theft. If someone stole from Ruby's Antiques, I honestly believed the store would handle it in its own way. I didn't want to imagine how. I started making my way toward the back, weaving between mismatched cabinets and stacks of chairs that looked like they were leaning together for support. The layout of the store changes just enough to make you question your memory. Some days the basement door is in one spot, some days it's in another, and I've learned not to fight it. You find what the store lets you find. I climbed over a cluster of dining sets that had spilled out of their section like they were alive and expanding. I told myself I'd reorganize later, knowing I probably wouldn't. I gave the doll section a wide berth, like it could smell fear. Near the back corner, I spotted Mr. Callahan. He was standing beside a shelf, staring between it and something he held in his hands. As I got closer, I realized it was an old blueprint, faded and covered in lines that made no sense. It looked like a floor plan designed by someone who hated geometry and wanted revenge. My foot caught on a plastic plant spilling out of its pot. I lurched forward, and the only thing that kept me from crashing into Mr. Callahan was a quick grab at a chair back and a loud, very unprofessional "shit." "Mr." Callahan jumped, then reached out and steadied me with a broad hand on my shoulder. The warmth of it was immediate, and for a second it pushed back the chill that had been creeping up my arms since that phone call. "Mr. Callahan," I said, forcing a smile to cover my embarrassment. "Sorry about that." He sighed like he'd seen worse. Then, in a very obvious move, he rolled the blueprint up and half tucked it behind his back. "Not a problem, kid. I hadn't planned on running into him, but he knew the store's weird corners better than I did. He was here constantly. I couldn't remember the last time he actually bought anything, but he kept showing up." I kept my polite tone. "Have you come across the basement today by any chance?" For a moment, he didn't answer. He just looked at me. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he was trying to figure out what I was really asking. The back of my neck prickled under his stare. Then he jerked his thumb behind him. Right there. And there it was. I swear I hadn't noticed it until he pointed it out. The basement door stood open, like it was waiting for me. A thin brass chain hung across the opening at waist height with a hand-painted sign that said employees only. A naked light bulb lit the steps. Yellow light spilled down the staircase and glinted off tile that looked freshly waxed. That was new. Ruby's Antiques was never pristine. Not like that. I forced myself to breathe slowly and step toward it. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. I stepped over the chain and began to descend. Behind me, I heard him mutter something, and the rustle of him unrolling his blueprint again, but the sounds faded under the buzzing of the basement lights and the heavy quiet that rose from below like a pulse. My shoes clicked on the tiled steps. The sour smell thickened, wrapping around the back of my throat. I pulled my sweater sleeve over my nose and mouth as I reached the bottom. A narrow hallway stretched out in front of me. The flickering light played tricks on my eyes, making the floor look like it sloped upward and the ceiling dipped lower, like the space was tightening, squeezing, trying to close around me. I lifted my chin and walked forward anyway. In that place, hesitation felt like blood in the water. At the end of the hall was a locked door. I used the same brass key from upstairs. It opened into special storage. The room should have been a single storage space filled with boxes. Instead, it felt like something longer, stretched out, as if someone had taken the room and pulled it like taffy. Boxes and containers were stacked everywhere. Cardboard, wooden chests, metal toolboxes, anything with a lid. One bare bulb hung from a chain, swaying gently in the draft from the open door. Shadows shifted across the floor in odd, sharp shapes. I tried not to look too hard into those shadows. Something skittered nearby. I told myself it was rats. It had to be rats. The sound came closer, then faded away. Closer, then farther, like something was circling me just outside the edge of the light. I went to the nearest stack of containers and started reading labels. Mrs. Rutledge's handwriting was looping and neat, but the labels themselves rarely made sense. Some were just numbers. Some were in Cyrillic, some in Japanese characters, and some were marked with symbols that looked more like warnings than words. After a few minutes, I found one that said Celeste. That seemed right. It didn't feel right, but it seemed right. The box was actually a small silver jewelry case, carved with swirling designs and secured with a tiny padlock. The moment I lifted it, the metal stole heat from my hands like it was thirsty for it. Within seconds, my fingers ached. I tucked it against my chest and turned around. My heart dropped so hard it made me feel nauseous. The door was gone. I don't mean I couldn't see it. I mean it wasn't there. In its place was a wall of stacked containers and hanging lights stretching into a long, crowded space. I stood frozen, staring, trying to make my brain accept what my eyes were telling it. I was sure I hadn't walked far. 10 feet, maybe, I should have been able to turn around and see the doorway I'd entered through. But behind me was only more storage, more stacks, more dangling bulbs that blinked like tired eyes. I shut my eyes and inhaled until my chest hurt, and the sour smell burned my throat. Then I exhaled slowly until my head felt light. When I opened my eyes again, the door still wasn't there. Worse, the room looked narrower than it had a moment ago, like it was slowly compressing. "Fuck," I whispered, then immediately bit the inside of my cheek. Mrs. Rutledge hated swearing while I was on shift, even when I was alone. Even when I was terrified. I'd gotten texts before for less. I shifted the jewelry box under one arm. Cold seeped through my sweater and my button-down shirt, spreading across my ribs until I couldn't stop shivering. I reached for my phone. My back pocket was empty. I checked the other pocket. Empty, I checked my front pockets, even though I already knew I hadn't put it there. Nothing. I could picture my phone perfectly, sitting face up on the register desk, showing the time and my lock screen photo of the stray cat that hung around my apartment. Puddles, big eyes, chipped ear, My phone was up there, in the normal world, while I was down here with this freezing box and a missing door. I had been trapped in the basement before. Not often, but enough times that I had a routine for it. But never without my phone. That meant I couldn't call Mrs. Rutledge, I couldn't ask for instructions, I couldn't even check the time to see how long I'd been down. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The storage room was familiar and wrong at the same time, like someone had copied it from memory but stretched the details until they didn't quite fit. "There's always a way out," I murmured, repeating Mrs. Rutledge's words from the last time this happened. "You only have to find it." Then I picked a direction and started walking. I couldn't tell you how long. Minutes and hours felt the same down there. The space kept going and going and going. The stacks of boxes changed slightly, but the end never got closer. I passed hanging bulbs that flickered in and out. I passed piles of containers that looked old enough to crumble. The jewelry box stayed pressed to my chest, and the cold coming off it was the only thing keeping my skin from feeling like it was on fire with fear. The skittering noises returned, louder this time. Not like small paws, like something heavier moving quickly, just out of sight. When I finally spotted a door, half hidden behind a tower of cardboard boxes taller than me, I almost cried. I rushed to it, yanked it open, and stumbled through, and I was back in Ruby's Antiques. Real Ruby's Antiques. The cramped aisles, the dusty smell, the sunlight pouring through the one window in a harsh golden stripe. My knees nearly gave out with relief. Cool air touched the sweat on my skin and made me shiver again, but it was normal cool, not that basement cold. I took a long breath like I'd been underwater. Mr. Callahan was still somewhere in the back, partly hidden in the clutter. I lifted a hand in a quick wave. He didn't react, probably too focused on whatever he was doing. A woman stood in the jewelry aisle, bent forward as she examined it. I didn't recognize her, but she didn't look like she needed help, so I didn't interrupt. I made it back to the register and sank into my chair like it could hold me together. I set Celeste's silver jewelry box on the desk and wiped smudges off it with my sleeve until it gleamed again. Then I waited for Mrs. Rutledge's friend to show up and claim it. I told myself I'd close the shop the moment the pickup happened, no matter what time it was. I wanted my bed. I wanted a day where the weirdest thing that happened was someone buying an ugly doll. Time passed. Mr. Callahan didn't come to the register. The woman in the jewelry aisle didn't come to the register either. The bell above the front door never rang. Nobody came in. Nobody left. The longer I sat there, the colder my hands became. At first, it was just my fingertips, then my knuckles. My skin went pale, almost yellow, like the blood had drained away. I rubbed my hands together and held them in the stripe of sunlight, trying to soak up warmth like I could collect it. It didn't work. If anything, the cold got worse. My fingers stiffened. The skin under my nails turned faintly blue. Frowning, I lifted my hands to my face and breathed hot air onto them. My breath came out in white wisps of steam. I stared at that for a second, not understanding. It couldn't be freezing inside the store. Outside it was spring, unseasonably warm, bright blue sky, and green grass and sun-baked sidewalks. The air conditioner in Ruby's Antiques was old and barely functional. I'd spent summers sweating through my shirt behind this same desk. There was no way it could turn the place into a freezer. A shiver ran up my spine, hard enough to rattle my teeth. The cold felt damp now, and the sour smell of mildew crept into the air. The same smell from the basement. Maybe I'd left the basement door open when I came up. Maybe the thought hit me like a punch. I didn't remember climbing the stairs. I didn't remember stepping out of the basement hallway into the store. I remembered opening a door in special storage and suddenly being in Ruby's Antiques, like I'd cut from one scene to another with no transition. My throat tightened. "What the fuck?" I whispered, and then flinched at my own voice. That was the third time I'd sworn today. If this was the real shop, I'd be getting a text any minute. But my phone wasn't in my pocket. It wasn't on the desk either. It should have been right there. I had left it at the register. I remembered that clearly. Face up, with Puddles the cat staring at me from the screen. Now it was gone. And that meant I wasn't upstairs. Not really. I was still in the basement. I was just in a version of the shop that the basement had built around me. That's when I noticed the silence. The gramophone wasn't playing. No soft jazz. No crackle of record. No humming brass. The woman in the jewelry aisle wasn't making any noise either. No clinking of chains. No shifting of trays. Nothing. The silence was thick, like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. I felt alone and watched at the same time, which is the worst kind of feeling. Slowly, I turned my head toward the corner where I'd last seen Mr. Callahan. He wasn't there anymore. My eyes drifted back to the woman in the jewelry aisle. She was still bent over the display, but she had gone completely still. Not the stillness of someone concentrating, the stillness of a mannequin posed in place. In the harsh light from the window, her skin looked strange, smooth and shiny, like plastic that had been warmed and molded. Her hair was long and black, but it didn't look like normal hair. It gleamed with an oily rainbow sheen, like gasoline on wet pavement. I leaned forward slightly in my chair to get a better look. The leather creaked. In that silence, the sound was loud enough to make my stomach drop. The woman twitched, a small jerk, like a puppet string being pulled. Then another. Tiny popping and clicking sounds came from her body as she began to move. I stayed frozen, hardly breathing, watching as her head lifted in slow increments. My mind was screaming at me to move, to run, to grab something, to do anything except sit there like prey. But my body wouldn't listen. Her face turned toward me. I felt instantly sick. Not because she was covered in blood or had some monstrous mouth or empty eye sockets. She didn't look like a horror movie creature. She looked almost human. Almost her skin was pale and flawless and shiny, like it had been polished. Her eyes were too dark, too large. Her features were arranged correctly, but somehow wrong, like they'd been copied from a photograph and recreated in a way that was technically perfect, but lifeless. She was imperfectly perfect, like an image that had been edited too much. I fumbled for the jewelry box, gripping it against my chest. My chair scraped back hard enough to clatter into the wall behind the register. The woman tilted her head. Her hair slid over her shoulder in a smooth, liquid movement that didn't match the stiff clicks of her joints. For a split second, as she moved, her face looked painted on, like the features might smear if you rubbed them too hard. Then she started toward me. Slow, jerky, stop-start movements. Click, click, click with every step, like hard plastic tapping on hard plastic. I wanted her nowhere near me. Clutching the silver box like a child clutching a stuffed animal, I slipped away from the register and into the cramped aisles of this fake store. I tried to remember where I'd come from. I remembered a door near the back left corner, tucked between clothing racks and a weird board game display. If I could reach it, I could retrace my steps and get out. I spotted the door exactly where I expected it, and a wave of relief hit me so hard my eyes stung. I yanked it open. A narrow staircase led down. Deeper. No, I said out loud, my teeth clenched. No, I shut the door and opened it again, like the second time would fix it. The staircase was still there, narrower than it should have been, darker, and the air drifting up from below smelled like frost. Click, 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 I whipped my head around. A curtain of oil-black hair was spilling into the aisle from behind a cabinet stacked with chessboards. Then, her face appeared, peeking around the edge. Her pale fingers curled around the wood, and those big dark eyes fixed on me without blinking. I made a noise that I can only describe as an undignified squeak. I stumbled back, my heel catching the first step, my stomach dropping with that horrible feeling of nearly falling. For a long second, nothing moved. Then she crept fully into view. I turned and ran down the stairs, taking them two at a time. The stairwell felt like a tunnel. The only light came from a buzzing bulb overhead. The stairs went on too long, and the air got colder with every step. At the bottom was a plain wooden door painted white in rough strokes. I threw it open and stumbled through. Ruby's Antiques. Again, but she was there too, closer than before. It didn't make sense. It didn't have time to make sense. I spun around and saw another staircase behind me, leading down again. The shop around me looked wrong now, like everything had been coated in a thin layer of shiny vinyl. The floors gleamed too much. The light was too harsh. The cold was so intense my hand felt numb where it held the jewelry box. Panic took over completely. I ran down the stairs again and again. Every time I burst through a door, I landed in another version of Ruby's Antiques. And every time she was there, closer, inching toward me with that clicking stop-motion movement. I slammed doors. I ran until my lungs burned. I kept going down because the stairs were always behind me, waiting, like the only choice the place would allow. Closer, closer, closer. The last time I tried to back away from her, I forgot about the staircase behind me. My heel slipped off the first step, and my balance vanished. I grabbed the railing with one hand and the jewelry box with the other. I managed to slow myself, but I still went down hard, half sliding, half tumbling, until I hit the bottom. Pain shot through my tailbone. The back of my head struck something that felt like a thin wooden door. The world spun gray and black. When my vision cleared, she was coming down the stairs. My blood went cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. I scrambled backward, searching for a handle on the door behind me. But my fingers found only smooth wood. No knob, no latch. Just seems like it fit perfectly into the frame and refused to open. The stairwell was too narrow. She had to angle her shoulders slightly, brushing the concrete walls as she descended. Her body moved wrong when she crouched, her joints bending a little too far, like she wasn't built for gravity the way I was. I tried to stand. My legs shook so hard I couldn't get my feet under. She reached the bottom step until our shoes touched. Then she crouched in front of me, and her smell hit me, metallic and sweet, like burnt sugar and melting plastic. Tears sprang to my eyes from pure panic, and in the middle of that fear, something in me went strangely numb, like my brain couldn't handle any more. Her long, pale fingers reached out. I expected pain. I expected her hand to go through my chest. I expected blood. I expected something violent and final. Instead, she pressed her hand lightly against my sweater, and her nails snagged the knit just enough to fray it. Then she delicately took the silver jewelry box from my arms. I froze, confused in a way that almost hurt more than terror. She cradled the box against her arm like it was a... Then she peeled the handwritten label off it, folded the paper neatly in half, and held it out to me. I stared at it. My throat was tight. When I spoke, my voice cracked badly. "You are Celeste?" She didn't answer. I don't know if she could. She stood with a series of plasticky clicks, turned and climbed back up the stairs with that same jerky motion. I watched her go, shaking, my fingers numb, my heart hammering. When she disappeared through the doorway at the top, I sat there for another moment trying to breathe like a normal person again. Then, when my legs finally worked, I turned to the door behind me. This time it opened without resistance. It led into the familiar narrow corridor of the basement. The moment I stepped through, the door slid shut behind me, turning back into the locked, normal-looking door it had always been. I didn't wait to see if it would change its mind. I ran up the hallway, up the tiled stairs, nearly tripping over the brass chain as I scrambled over it. My ankle caught the employee's only sign, and it jerked sideways, but I didn't stop. Mr. Callahan looked up as I stumbled into the aisles. He gave me a long, strange look, like he was trying to decide whether to ask questions. I climbed over a pile of chairs and stumbled toward the register. My phone sat exactly where I had left it, face up. Puddles the cat grinning at me. I touched the screen, and it lit up like nothing had happened. Like the past hour or day or whatever it had been had never existed. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. Instead, I sank into my chair, leaned forward, and let my forehead thunk against the desk. The solid wood felt weirdly comforting. "Behind me, mister," Callahan's voice came from somewhere near my shoulder. "You okay?" "You look," I jerked upright and forced my best customer service expression onto my face, even though I could feel sweat-damp hair sticking out in every direction. "I'm fine, Mr. Callahan," I said too brightly. Then I stood so fast he actually flinched. "But I regret to inform you Ruby's Antiques will be closing soon," I continued. "Very soon." Right now, actually, he opened his mouth, but I didn't let him get far. I needed everyone out. I needed the door locked. I needed to be somewhere that didn't smell like mildew and plastic and impossible cold. Right now, I repeated, "If you have any purchases you need processed?" It was a pointless question. He never bought anything. Sure enough, he shook his head. I scanned the store. I didn't see any other customers. If there were, they could find their way out. The bell over the door didn't ring. The gramophone kept playing softly, like it had never stopped. Everything looked normal, and I didn't trust any of it. I walked Mr. Callahan to the front door and ushered him outside into the reddish light of late afternoon. Real air hit my face. Real warmth. It made my eyes sting. As soon as I locked the door behind him, I checked my phone. 2 missed texts from Mrs. Rutledge. The first one was timestamped 2:26 p.m. Remember, impeccable customer service never involves foul language. The second one was from 6:07 p.m. Great job, sweetie. Celeste is so happy with her order. You've gained yourself a repeat customer for sure. I stared at that message until my screen dimmed. I hadn't noticed it was that late. 4 hours, or maybe more. Time didn't behave normally in that basement. I didn't go back to Ruby's Antiques for 6 days after that. I would have stayed away longer, but I only get paid for the hours I'm open, and even though this job pays surprisingly well for retail, I'm not exactly in a position to skip work forever. Nothing like that has happened again since. No special orders. No missing doors. No freezing breath in the middle of spring. But every time my phone lights up with Miss Rutledge's name, a fresh wave of cold dread crawls down my spine. I keep thinking about asking her to hire another employee, someone I could send into the basement to handle special orders. Someone who could go down there when we need to deal with the water shutoff valve or the electrical panel, which, for reasons I don't understand, are also down there. When she hired me, Mrs. Rutledge told me the shop doesn't take kindly to most strangers. She said the antiques liked my vibe, whatever that means. She said it like she was joking, but her eyes didn't match her smile. Still, one more stranger couldn't hurt, could it? Maybe I'll ask. I guess I won't know until I do. Story 2, I was driving alone from New York to North Carolina for my grandfather's funeral. The kind of trip you take with your thoughts turned all the way down, because if you let them rise, everything you've been holding back comes rushing in. I left later than I should have, telling myself I'd push through the night and make it by morning. The highway was almost empty. The sky was the color of wet asphalt. And the rain kept getting worse until it wasn't really rain anymore. It was a solid sheet of water that erased the world beyond my headlights. Right around 11 p.m., I pulled off Interstate 95 somewhere in Virginia because it felt unsafe to keep going. My windshield wipers were working as hard as they could, but they weren't fast enough. Each sweep cleared my view for a second. Then the glass filled up again like someone was dumping a bucket over it again and again. I leaned forward in my seat, tense in my shoulders, trying to see the signs before I was already past them. That was when my GPS froze and then went blank, like it had given up. I tapped the screen, then restarted it, then tried my phone, but the signal in that area was terrible. The map wouldn't load. I couldn't even get a simple recalculating. It was just silence and a spinning icon that never finished. The only light inside the car came from the dashboard, a soft, dim glow that made the interior feel smaller and more closed in than it already was. Then the low fuel light came on. That orange little symbol was so steady and bright it felt personal, like it was watching me. I did the mental math and didn't like the answer. I could either keep driving in the dark with no GPS and hope I ran into a gas station, or I could get off the road and find somewhere to wait out the storm until morning. Either way, I needed help from something that existed in the real world, not on a screen. I took the first exit I saw, following a narrow road that disappeared into thick pine trees. The kind of trees that swallow sound. The kind that make your headlights feel weak. Water pooled on the road and splashed up against the sides of my car. The storm turned everything into a blur of black trunks, wet leaves, the occasional reflective road marker flaring bright, and then I drove a few minutes like that, mostly guessing, until a faint green glow flickered through the rain ahead. At first, I thought it was a traffic light, but it was too low and too far off to the side. As I got closer, I saw it was a sign. Neon, old neon. The letters struggled to stay lit, buzzing and blinking in a tired rhythm. Pine Valley Motel. Vacancy. The word vacancy flickered so much it looked like it was breathing. I didn't care. At that moment, it might as well have said safe place. I turned down the driveway immediately, tires sliding a little in the mud. The drive was narrow and uneven, lined with trees that leaned in as if they were trying to listen. Somewhere deeper in the woods, something creaked in the wind. The motel itself looked like it had been built in the 1970s and never updated. The kind of place with cabin-style rooms spread out in a line. The paint was faded. The wood looked swollen from years of damp weather. There were a few dim porch lights, but most were dead. The front office had one working light inside, a weak yellow glow that made the rain outside look even dark. I parked as close as I could and ran to the office with my jacket over my head. The rain soaked me anyway. When I shoved the door open, a tiny brass bell chimed above it, sharp and cheerful, totally wrong for the place. I paused for half a second, listening to the sound fade away, then stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The smell hit first. Dampness, mold, and some kind of cheap cleaning chemical that didn't really clean anything. It only tried to cover up whatever was underneath. The air felt heavy, like it had been trapped inside for a long time. Behind a worn wooden counter sat an old man with thick glasses. They magnified his eyes so much they looked too large, too round, like they belonged to a doll. He wore a dirty flannel shirt and had the posture of someone who had been sitting in that same chair for years. He didn't look up right away. He kept staring at an old magazine in his hands as if I wasn't there at all. A few long seconds passed. I stood awkwardly, dripping onto the floor, waiting for him to acknowledge me. Finally, he lifted his head slowly. His gaze moved over me like he was reading something written on my face. Then he smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was hollow, like his mouth was doing the motion without any feeling behind it. His teeth were yellow and broken down. "I need a room," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just for the night." He didn't answer at first. Then, without saying a word, he reached down behind the counter and brought up a heavy metal key. It was old-fashioned, not a key card. The tag on it said 14. He placed it on the counter with a dull clink. He held up 2 fingers and then pointed at the cash box. 20? I asked. He gave a slow nod. I dug my wallet out and handed him a $20 bill. He slid it away, still moving like everything took effort. Then he raised one thin hand and pointed toward the darkness outside, down the path where the cabins were. "Last cabin on the left," he said. His voice was dry and rough, like he didn't use it much. "Don't open the door for anyone after midnight." It took me a second to react because it sounded like the kind of line you hear in a horror movie, not real life. I almost laughed, but something about his face stopped me. He wasn't smiling now. He He was watching me closely, like he cared whether I believed him. I forced a small nod, as if I'd take the warning seriously, and picked up the key. In my head, I told myself it was probably just an old guy's idea of a joke. People in isolated places say weird things. Maybe he had run-ins with drunks or thieves. Maybe he wanted to scare strangers for entertainment. Either way, I was soaked, exhausted, and running on nerves. I just wanted a bed. Outside, the rain felt even colder. I jogged back to my car, drove slowly down the muddy path, and found cabin 14. It really was the last one, sitting apart from the others, surrounded by trees on 3 sides. The porch light above the door worked, but it buzzed like it might die at any second. I unlocked the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The cold was immediate, like the room had been left open to the night for weeks. The air smelled stale, and that moldy dampness was stronger in here than in the office. The cabin was simple: a double bed with an old blanket, a bulky TV with a thick frame like something from decades ago, and a small nightstand with a corded phone that looked like it belonged in a museum. There was one window facing the woods behind the cabin, the glass streaked with rain and dirt. I tried the heater. The unit rattled loudly and then blew out cold air mixed with dust that smelled burnt. I shut it off quickly, coughing. The idea of sleeping without heat wasn't great, but I was too tired to fight with the machine. I kept my clothes on, climbed into bed, and pulled the heavy blanket over me. The mattress felt slightly damp. The sheets smelled like they'd been washed a long time ago and stored in a basement. I told myself I would stay awake just long enough to calm down, then I'd fall asleep and wake up to daylight, and this would just be another miserable stop on a miserable trip. I must have dozed off for a little while, because the next thing I remember is the sense that something had changed. The cabin was still dark, rain still hammered the roof, but there was another sound underneath it now, faint at first. I lay still and listened, trying to separate it from the storm. Footsteps, not on the porch, not on the road. Footsteps moving slowly around the cabin, sinking into wet mud with each step. They were light, but steady, paced like someone taking their time. The sound circled from one side of the cabin to the other. My stomach tightened hard, and my body went instantly alert. I told myself it could be an animal, a raccoon, a deer, anything, but the rhythm didn't feel like paws. It felt like feet. And whoever it was didn't hurry, didn't stumble, didn't slip. They walked like they knew exactly where they were. The footsteps stopped at the back wall, right behind the headboard of my bed. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I stared into the darkness, eyes wide, listening so hard my ears felt hot. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard a faint scratching on the wood outside. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails being dragged across the wall one careful inch at a time. The hair on my arms lifted. My mind tried to argue with itself. Maybe branches in the wind, maybe an animal climbing. But it sounded too precise, too close. It sounded like someone wanted me to hear it. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, feet touching the cold floor. The cabin felt even colder now, as if the air had thickened. I stepped toward the window, keeping my movements slow, and peered through the rain-streaked glass. I could see nothing but darkness and the shape of trees swaying. No flashlight, no outline of a person, just the woods. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and started to turn away, telling myself I was scaring myself for no reason. That was when the phone on the nightstand rang. The sound was loud and sharp, old-fashioned and violent, like it was screaming. My whole body jumped. My heart hit my ribs so hard it hurt. I stared at the phone, stunned that it even worked. Most places like this don't have lines anymore, and even if they do, nobody calls at midnight. It rang again, and the noise filled the small room. Against my better judgment, I went to it and lifted the receiver. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, I heard breathing, heavy, fast, right up against the mouthpiece, as if someone was holding the phone too close. In the background, there was a soft hiss that sounded like rain. "Hello," I said. My voice sounded thin. "Who is this?" No answer. Just breathing. "Is this the office?" I tried again, even though that made no sense. The breathing grew heavier, like whoever it was excited or scared. Then, through the line, I heard a sound that made my skin go cold all over. A tiny brass bell chiming, bright and clear, the exact same bell from the office door. And then the old man's voice came through, not dry and calm like before, but high and panicked, full of terror. "It's not me," he screamed. "He is inside with you." Before I could even understand what he meant, the power went out. The cabin dropped into total darkness. No TV light, no heater hum, no weak glow from anything. Even the buzzing porch light outside died, leaving nothing but the sound of rain slamming the roof and my own breath. I froze with the receiver still in my hand. The line went dead. I could hear nothing through it now. Then I heard another sound inside the cabin. A click, slow and careful. The bathroom lock turning from the inside. I couldn't see the bathroom door, but I knew exactly where it was. I had glanced at it when I came in. It was only a few steps away, and now something was on the other side of it, unlocking it as if it had been waiting there the whole time. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed without meaning. My legs felt useless. The darkness was thick enough that I couldn't see my own hands. The air in the room changed, too. The mold smell intensified. But it wasn't just mold anymore. It turned into something rotten, a sick, sweet stench like meat left out too long. The bathroom door shifted. Not a slam, not a sudden movement, just a slow, steady opening, like someone was taking their time to let the fear. The hinge made the faintest groan. I clamped my mouth shut to keep from making a sound. My thoughts raced. My car was outside. The office was down the path. My phone, my cell phone, was in the pocket of my coat hanging near the front door. If I could reach it, I could call 911. Or at least shine a light. Light would make this real, would give me a shape to run from. I slid off the bed and crawled. I kept my weight low, moving in inches. The wooden floor was cold against my knees. Each floorboard creaked softly under pressure, and every creak felt like it was screaming in the dark. I paused after each tiny sound, waiting for whatever was in the cabin with me to react. I reached the coat. My hands shook as I felt for the phone. When my fingers closed around it, I almost cried with relief. I pulled it out and turned the screen on, keeping the brightness as low as I could. The faint glow felt dangerous, but I needed it. I turned on the flashlight. The beam landed on the bathroom doorway. The door stood open. The bathroom itself looked empty. At first, sink, mirror, shower curtain, but then I saw the floor. It was smeared with wet mud, fresh mud, darker than the wood, like it had been tracked in seconds ago. And there were footprints, large, bare footprints, pressed deep and clear, leading out of the bathroom and across the room toward the small closet in the corner. My throat tightened so hard I could barely swallow. I moved the light slowly to the closet. The closet door was cracked open a few inches. I stared at that gap as if my eyes could force it wider. My hand shook so badly, the beam wobbled. For a moment, nothing. Then, right there in the dark gap, I saw an eye. A human eye, wide open, unblinking, staring directly at me. The skin around it was pale, too pale, and caked with dirt. It didn't look like someone hiding and peeking. It looked like something that had been waiting, watching, perfectly still. A sound escaped me, half gasp, half choke. I stumbled backward and hit the small wooden table. With the impact, jolted my arm. My phone slipped and fell, landing face up on the floor. The flashlight beam shot up onto the ceiling, turning the room into a nightmare of shadows and angles. At the exact same time, something exploded out of the closet. I didn't see it clearly. I only heard it fast, scraping movement, like a person moving wrong, like an animal with too many. The sound of something rushing toward me in the dark. I didn't wait. Survival took over. I lunged for the front door, hands searching for the lock, fumbling hard. The metal felt slick under my fingers. I got it open and threw myself out into the rain. Cold water hit my face like a slap. Mud sucked at my shoes as I ran. I didn't look back, not even once. I sprinted to my car, yanked the door open, and practically fell into the driver's seat. I slammed the door and locked it instantly. Hitting the button again and again like that could make it safer. My hands were shaking so badly I missed the ignition twice. When the engine finally turned over, the sound was the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. I flipped on the high beams. The driveway lit up, and I screamed. The old man from the office lay in the mud directly in front of my car. He was flat on his back, twisted slightly, his flannel shirt torn open. There was a dark pool spreading beneath him, and even through the rain I could see it was blood. His thick glasses were crooked, and his eyes, huge behind the lenses, stared up at nothing. My brain couldn't process it. One second he was a creepy motel owner, the next he was a body in the mud. I slammed my foot down to reverse, then stopped, unsure if I'd run over him. My mind spun in circles, trying to find the part that made sense. Before I could decide what to do, something hit my car. Not a gentle thump, a heavy, violent impact that rocked the entire vehicle, as if something massive had dropped from above and landed dead center on my trunk. The suspension bounced. The roof creaked. For half a second, I couldn't move. My eyes went to the rearview mirror, and what I saw there turned my blood to ice. A face was pressed flat against my back window. It was hairless and distorted, with skin stretched tight in places and loose in others like it didn't fit right. The mouth spread into a huge smile, too wide, reaching toward both ears. The eyes were bright and focused, staring into the car like it could see every fear I had. In one hand, it held the corded phone from the cabin. The wire was torn and dangling, swinging slightly with the movement of the car. It looked like a trophy. My body finally obeyed. I hit the gas as hard as I could. The tires spun in the mud, throwing water and dirt. For a few terrifying seconds, the car didn't move, just screamed and shook. Then it caught traction and launched forward. I swerved around the old man's body, barely missing him, and shot down the narrow driveway. The thing on the roof rolled backward from the sudden jolt. I heard claws scraping against metal, a harsh, grating sound that made my teeth ache. It dug in, holding on. The roof groaned as if something heavy was shifting across it. I didn't slow down. I drove blind through the rain, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers hurt. The driveway felt endless, twisting between trees like a tunnel. Every few seconds, the car shuddered as the weight above moved. I imagined it crawling, testing, looking for a way inside. I pictured those fingers prying at the doors, tearing through the roof, reaching down for my head. When I finally burst out onto the rural road, I almost cried. I accelerated hard, wheels cutting through water, headlights stabbing through fog. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, expecting to see that face again. Sometimes I thought I heard movement above me. Then it would go still. I couldn't tell if it was still there or if my mind was filling in gaps. I drove like that for what felt like forever, but it was probably 10 minutes. Then, through the rain, I saw brighter lights ahead, steady, electric, real. The shapes of big trucks appeared, parked in rows. A Love's truck stop, wide open and fully lit like a small city compared to the woods I'd just escaped. Relief hit me so hard I nearly lost control. I swung into the lot fast, brakes squealing, and stopped right in front of the main building. I sat there for a moment with my hands still on the wheel, chest heaving. I forced myself to look in the mirror again. I forced myself to look up through the windshield as if I could see the roof. I couldn't tell anything in the rain and glare. I got out anyway. I didn't even close my jacket. I ran through puddles and shoved open the store door. Warm air and the smell of coffee hit me. The bright fluorescent lights made everything feel unreal, like I'd walked onto the set of a different life. A young guy behind the counter looked up, and his expression changed immediately when he saw me. I must have looked insane, soaked, muddy, pale, shaking. I went straight to him and said, "Call the police. Please, right now." He hesitated, eyes flicking over me like he was deciding if I was dangerous. Then he picked up the phone behind the counter. I tried to explain, stumbling over my words. I told him there was a motel down the road. I told him the owner was dead. I told him something had chased me. The police arrived in about 15 minutes. I sat in the back of a cruiser with the heat blasting, still trembling so hard my teeth clicked. An investigator leaned in and asked me to tell him everything from the beginning. So I did. I told him about the green neon sign, the old man with the thick glasses, the warning about midnight, the footsteps in the mud, the scratching at the wall, the phone ringing, the terror in the old man's voice when he said it wasn't him, when he said something was inside with me. I told him about the bathroom door unlocking, the muddy footprints, the eye staring through the closet crack, the body in the driveway, the thing on my roof holding the phone. The investigator listened, but his face stayed tight and skeptical, the way people look when they're trying to be polite to someone who's clearly panicking. He asked me a few questions, the practical kind: where exactly was the motel, how far, which direction, what did the sign say, what cabin number. Then he sent 2 units to check it out. They kept me at the truck stop for hours. Another officer stayed nearby, watching me like I might bolt. The rain kept falling outside, tapping the windows in a steady rhythm that made my nerves worse. Every time the door chimed, I flinched. Every time a phone rang somewhere in the store, my stomach dropped. Near dawn, the investigator came back. His face looked different now. Not smug, not doubtful. Disturbed, confused in a way that didn't seem forced. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees, and spoke quietly. "We went out to the place you described," he said. "There's no operating motel there." I stared at him, not understanding. He continued, "The Pine Valley Motel has been abandoned and boarded up since 1994. There was a fire that destroyed the main office. The owner died inside." My head started to spin. The words didn't fit what I'd lived through. "No," I said then louder, "that's impossible. I was just there. He gave me the key. He's out there in the mud. His body is out there. Go back." The investigator held my gaze and shook his head slowly. "We searched the entire property. There are no bodies. The cabins are overgrown. The office is burned out. It's been sitting like that for decades." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My mind ran in circles, trying to make reality match his explanation. It couldn't. I could still smell that room in my nose. I could still hear the phone ring in my ears. "There was one thing," he added after a moment, and his tone changed. Like he didn't want to say it, but had to. "One thing we found that we can't explain." My voice came out small. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside was the heavy metal key, the one I'd paid for, the one I'd held in my hand all night. The tag read 14. "We found this inside the last cabin," he said. "It was lying in thick dust, but it had your fingerprints on it. Fresh." I stared at the bag until my eyes hurt. The key looked real. It was real. My fingers had wrapped around that cold metal. I remembered the exact weight of it. "That's not all," he said. He walked me outside to my car. The rain had eased to a mist, and the sky was turning gray. He shined his flashlight across the roof, and my stomach dropped again. There were deep gouges in the paint. Long, curved scratches grouped like the marks of a hand, 5 lines at a time, carved hard into the metal as if something sharp had raked it over and over. Then he moved the light to the back window. Right in the center of the glass was a smudged imprint shaped like a face pressed against it. Forehead, nose, the suggestion of a mouth stretched wide. There was a dark residue, too, thick enough that the rain hadn't fully washed it away. The investigator didn't say much after that. He didn't need to. The evidence was right there, and it didn't match any normal explanation. They eventually let me go. They took my statement again. They photographed the car. They told me they'd follow up. Later, I found out they closed it as something like vandalism, local troublemakers, vagrants, kids messing around. Anything that didn't involve an abandoned motel answering phones and a thing on the roof of my car grinning into my back window. I left Virginia as soon as I could. I didn't go to the motel again. I didn't even drive past the exit. I just kept going south until the sky looked different and the trees changed and I could breathe a little more. I sold the car the next day. I didn't care how much money I lost. Every time I looked at it, I could hear those claws scraping the roof. It's been 3 years since that night, and the official story is still the same. Nothing unusual, no bodies, No motel in operation, no real crime scene, just a frightened traveler in a storm. But my life didn't reset back to normal. Sometimes I can almost convince myself it was shock, grief, exhaustion, the weather, my mind snapping under pressure. Then I remember the key in that evidence bag. I remember the claw marks. I remember the face print on the glass. My body remembers it too. Because even now, I can't sleep well when it rains. I live in Chicago now, in an apartment building with working locks and bright hallways and neighbors on every side. I have a different job, a different routine, a different life. But on certain nights, when the rain starts late and the wind makes the windows whisper, that old feeling comes back, the sense that the world outside is too dark and too close. And on those nights, my cell phone will sometimes start vibrating with an unknown number. The first time it happened, I stared at it for a long time. I told myself it was spam, a wrong number, a robocall. I tried to ignore it until it stopped, but it kept calling over and over, patient and steady, like it knew I would break. Eventually, with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, I answered. I never hear a voice. I hear heavy, rapid breathing, close to the microphone, like someone's mouth is right against it. Behind that breathing, I hear something else. Faint, but unmistakable, a tiny brass bell chiming somewhere in the background. And then, after a short pause, I hear a slow, careful scratching sound. It starts faint, like a nail touching wood. Then it grows clearer, moving along a surface in a steady line. And every time I hear it, it feels like it's not coming from the phone at all. It feels like it's coming from the wall right behind the headboard of my bed. Story 3, I downloaded the matching app because the quiet in my apartment was starting to feel like something physical, like it had weight. Somewhere in your 20s, your days can turn into the same loop on repeat: wake up, commute, work, eat something, scroll for a while, sleep. Weeks pass, and nothing really changes. I didn't have many close friends, and I wasn't the kind of person who met strangers easily. Bars felt loud and fake. Parties felt like everyone already knew the rules except me, so I tried the app. At first, it felt harmless, even hopeful. I sat on my couch night after night, swiping through people who looked like they belonged in ads. Smiling photos in sunlight, beach pictures, gym mirror selfies, bios packed with jokes and must-love dogs and lists of requirements. I would send a message when someone seemed real. Most of the time, I got nothing back. Sometimes I'd get a few polite replies that died out after a day. After weeks of that, I was tired. Not angry, just drained. I opened the app with the intention of deleting it, and that's when the notification popped up. Her profile didn't look like the others. It was almost empty. 2 photos, both dim and slightly blurry, like they'd been taken quickly on an old phone in a dark room. In both pictures, she had dark hair and a small, weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. No friends in the background, no bright places, no signs of a normal life. Her bio was one short paragraph with no jokes, no emojis, no "I love hiking." It said she was a former surgeon and that she wanted someone understanding, someone who didn't judge, and someone willing to come over for a quiet evening. Former surgeon stood out. People lie online all the time, but that was a strange lie to pick. And the part about coming over right away should have been a red flag. It was. I felt it. But loneliness makes you negotiate with your own instincts. I told myself maybe she really did have social anxiety. Maybe she'd had a hard life. Maybe she was just honest. We matched, and within minutes she sent a message. It was short, just a greeting in my name, no small talk, no how was your day. I replied like a normal person, asked a few questions, tried to keep it light. Movies, music, work. Her responses came hours later, always late at night, and they were always brief. She didn't answer much about herself. She would ignore my questions and steer things back to meeting. Not flirting, not teasing, more like she was trying to get to the point as fast as possible. After 2 days of that, she wrote that she couldn't do coffee shops or bars. She said loud places made her feel like she couldn't breathe, like her skin was too tight. She asked if I could come to her place instead. She gave me an address on the far edge of the suburbs and suggested Tuesday evening. Every safety rule I'd ever heard played in my head. Meet in public. Tell a friend. Don't go to someone's house the first time. Don't go at night. Don't go to a place far away. The smarter part of me told me to unmatch and move on. But the other part of me, the part that had been sitting in a quiet apartment, listening to the fridge hum like it was the loudest thing in my life, said, just go. It's probably fine. You're being dramatic. People meet like this all the time. I agreed. On Tuesday, I got in my car after work and drove out as the sky darkened. The closer I got, the less the area felt like the city I knew. Streetlights became fewer and farther apart. Some were burned out completely, leaving long stretches of road lit only by my headlights. The houses weren't close together like they were near my apartment. They sat back from the road, separated by thick lots of trees and overgrown bushes that swallowed the spaces between properties. The address brought me to a street that looked tired. The asphalt was cracked. The sidewalks, where they existed, were broken and uneven. I pulled up to the house and just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel. The place looked neglected in a way that didn't feel like someone was just busy or broke. It looked like no one cared if it stayed standing. The front lawn was full of tall weeds and dead patches, like it hadn't been cut in months. The gutters along the roof hung at an angle as if they were ready to fall. One dim yellow bulb over the porch barely lit the concrete step and the front door. The windows were dark. I should have left then. I felt it deep in my stomach. A simple animal warning that didn't come with words. My body wanted to reverse out and drive back to my apartment and pretend this never happened. Instead, I forced myself to move. I told myself I was being rude. I told myself she might really be anxious, and this could actually be a good thing. I got out, shut the car door, and walked up the porch. I knocked 3 times. The door opened almost immediately, as if she'd been standing right behind it, waiting. She looked worse than her photos, not just different unwell. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy knot that looked like it had been done with shaking hands. Her skin was pale in a way that didn't look like no makeup. It looked like she hadn't seen daylight in a long time. Under her eyes were deep, bruised circles. Her eyes didn't settle on me the way most people's do when they meet you. They flicked past me first, scanning the street behind me, then landed on my face as if she was checking details. She wore a big gray sweater with stains on it and loose sweatpants. She looked like someone who'd stopped trying. "You actually came," she said. Her voice was rough, almost scratchy. There was no excitement in it, no nervous laugh, nothing that felt like a date. I said I would, I answered, trying to smile. My mouth felt stiff. It's nice to finally meet you. She didn't smile back. She just stepped back and pulled the door wider so I could enter. The moment I crossed the doorway, a wave of heat hit me. The inside of the house was too warm, the kind of heat that sits heavy in your lungs. It smelled stale, like air that had been recycled too many times without ever being refreshed. I was making tea, she said, and shut the door behind me. I heard the deadbolt slide into place with a loud, solid clack. Come into the back room. The front of the house is too drafty. Her choice of words didn't match the heat I was feeling, but I followed her anyway because I didn't know what else to do. We walked down a narrow hallway with weak lighting. The floorboards creaked loudly under my shoes. The walls were bare, no framed photos, no art, no mirror by the door. It didn't feel like anyone lived there. It felt like a space being used for something else. She stopped at a closed door at the end of the hallway and rested her hand on the knob. Then she turned her head slightly and looked me up and down. "You're in good shape," she said quietly. "You look healthy. That's very important." The way she said it made my skin tighten. Before I could ask what she meant, she opened the door and stepped aside, gesturing for me to go in first. I walked into the room. It was huge, like a living room that had been emptied completely. There was no couch, no TV, no furniture except a metal stool and a rolling stainless steel tray like something you'd see in a hospital. Bright halogen work lights hung from the ceiling, shining so harshly the room looked flat and unreal. The light didn't feel warm. It felt cruel. It showed everything. The floor was covered with clear plastic sheeting that had been taped down along the baseboards. It crinkled slightly under my feet. My brain stalled, as if it couldn't decide what it was looking at. On the far wall, nailed into the wooden studs like someone had mounted them there, were 3 men. They were alive. I could tell because their chests moved. Their breathing sounded wet, like someone trying to breathe through fluid. Their arms were spread out. Thick iron bolts went through their hands and into the wall, and other bolts held their shoulders in place. Their heads hung forward, their chins almost touching their chests. Dark, dried blood streaked down the wall beneath their arms. That was horrific enough, but my eyes kept dropping to what had been done to their legs. Their legs were gone from mid-thigh down, cut off cleanly the way a surgeon would do it. The ends of their thighs were stitched with thick black thread, crude and tight. But instead of empty stumps, there were other legs, attached large animal legs, covered in brown fur, ending in long hooked claws. They looked like something that belonged to a huge dog or a wild animal, but wrong in a way that made it hard to breathe. The fur was matted. The skin beneath it looked dark and unhealthy. Thick fluid seeped from the seams where human flesh met something that wasn't human. The smell hit me a second later. Rot, infection, something dead trying to pretend it wasn't. I stumbled back and tried to scream, but the sound got caught in my throat. I spun around to run back down the hall. She was already right behind me. She held a surgical scalpel in her hand, the blade steady, pointed at my stomach like she'd done it many times before. "Don't make a sound," she said. Her voice, it wasn't weak or scratchy now. It was flat and certain. "If you scream, I'll cut your femoral artery right here, and you'll bleed out before you reach the front door." Walk to the center of the room. My hands went up without me thinking. My whole body shook. I backed away from her and moved toward the center of the plastic-covered floor, unable to take my eyes off the men on the wall. "What are you doing?" I managed to say. My voice sounded small even to me. "What did you do to them?" "I'm trying to save him," she said calmly. She stepped into the room fully and shut the door behind her. I heard the lock click. Then she gestured toward a corner of the room that the harsh lights didn't quite reach. The shadows there looked thicker, like the darkness had substance. I turned my head, and the air in my lungs seemed to freeze. Chained to a thick radiator pipe was a creature. It was tall, but hunched like it couldn't stand straight. Its body was thin to the point of looking starved, ribs pushing against gray skin pulled tight like stretched fabric. Its spine made a long, raised line down its back. Its head was wrong, longer than a person's, shaped almost like a deer skull that had been stripped and left to rot. But it had eyes. Those eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Its mouth hung slightly open, showing jagged teeth that looked broken and uneven. Patches of coarse, brown fur clung to parts of its shoulders and back, as if it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. It had been hurt badly. One arm was missing, torn away at the shoulder, leaving a ragged wound that looked old and its lower legs were gone, cut off, leaving fresh stumps that still looked wet. The creature thrashed against the chains, the metal rattling hard. It snapped its jaws at empty air like it was trying to bite the light itself. "Sit," she ordered, pointing the scalpel at the metal stool near the tray. My legs didn't feel like mine anymore. I sat because I couldn't imagine doing anything else. She moved to a cabinet and pulled out folded blue surgical scrubs. She put them on over her clothes with quick, practiced movements. Then she snapped on latex gloves. Everything about her looked more alive when she did this, like she finally stepped into the role she understood. She took a clipboard from the tray and tossed it onto my lap. "Look at the charts," she said. "You need to understand the process. You need to understand why you're here. You're the perfect candidate, healthier than the others." My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the clipboard. The papers were filled with detailed notes. Heart rates, blood pressure readings, exact times, diagrams of incision lines, lists of drugs in doses that made my stomach turn, notes about immune rejection, tissue death, and infection spreading fast. It read like a nightmare written in medical handwriting. "You're attaching animal legs to people," I whispered, staring at the columns until the numbers blurred. "I'm grafting his limbs onto human hosts," she corrected, and nodded toward the creature in the corner. "I'm trying to find a match." The men on the wall failed. Their bodies rejected his tissue. It rots too fast. I need someone strong enough to accept it without falling apart. "Why?" I asked. I could feel tears on my face and didn't remember them starting. "What is that thing?" For a moment, she stopped moving. Her eyes went to the creature, and her expression softened, not with pity for me or the men on the wall, but with something like grief so deep it looked old. "He was my boyfriend," she said. The words didn't fit the room. They sounded like something you'd say over a kitchen table, not in a place like this. She stepped closer to the chained creature, careful to stay outside the range of its teeth. "We went camping last autumn," she said, and her voice took on a distant tone, like she was watching it again in her head. "We went deep into the state park, off the trails. We wanted quiet. We wanted to be alone." She swallowed, and I saw her throat move. The second night, I heard the tent rip open. I didn't even have time to sit up. Something grabbed him and dragged him out into the dark. He was screaming. I could still hear it. She looked back at me, and her grip on the scalpel tightened. There were two of them, she said. They moved through the trees fast, like animals. I grabbed his knife and ran after. I followed blood for miles. I followed it to a cave system hidden in the hills. I crawled in and hid in the dark. I watched. Her eyes went glassy, but she didn't blink much. There were monsters in the woods, she continued, running on animal legs, tearing through brush like it wasn't there. But when they reached the cave, I watched them change. Their bones broke and shifted. Their skin folded, and they turned into people. Normal human bodies, normal faces. My stomach flipped. They use human faces to walk into towns, she said. They use them to talk to people, to lure people. Then they change back to hunt. She lifted the scalpel slightly, and the metal caught the bright light. I waited until they were completely human, she said, and there was something cold in her voice now. I waited until they were weak, and then I killed them. I cut their throats while they slept in the dirt. I couldn't speak. It didn't matter whether I believed her. The room itself was proof that she was capable of anything. I found him in the back of the cave, she went on, quieter now. They had already started feeding. They took chunks from his legs, from his arm. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. I carried him out. I brought him here. I'm a surgeon. I know what to do. I cleaned the wounds. I gave antibiotics. I stitched what I could. She took a shaky breath. But whatever they have in their saliva, in their bite, it was already inside him, she said. It spread through his blood. I watched him change. I watched the man I loved stretch and break. Fur came out of his skin. And his mind went away slowly, until there was nothing left but hunger and pain. The creature on the chain let out a roar that vibrated through the room. It didn't sound like an animal exactly, and it didn't sound human either. It sounded like something trying to force air through a body that wasn't made for it. But he's stuck, she said quickly, like she couldn't bear the noise and had to talk over it. He can't change back. For some reason, he can't become human again. I think the damage, the trauma, broke the mechanism, like a switch that won't flip anymore. She turned and looked at me with eyes that were too wide, too focused. That's why I need the match, she said. If I can find a human body that accepts his limbs, it means the tissue can stabilize. It can live. And when I find the right person, I can reverse it. I can take your healthy human legs, she paused, as if saying it slowly made it sound more reasonable, and graft them onto him. The right biology, the right match, it could give his body the blueprint it needs. It could trigger the change. I just want him back. My mouth went dry. The room tilted slightly, as if my body was trying to faint to escape the moment. She turned away and picked up a large syringe attached to a thick glass vial filled with cloudy yellow liquid. She tapped the syringe like she was removing bubbles the way nurses do in movies, but her hands were steady, too steady. The men on the wall were weak, she said. They were desperate. They came here without asking questions. But you, her eyes ran over me again the way they had in the hallway. You look resilient. Roll up your sleeve. This will burn. You need to be out when I start. She walked toward me, the needle shining under the lights. In that second, fear changed into something sharper. A simple thought cut through everything. If that needle goes into me, I will not walk out of this house. I will wake up on that wall, and I will watch my own body rot. I didn't plead. I didn't negotiate. I didn't try to reason with her. Because you can't reason with someone who thinks this is love. When she stepped close enough to reach my arm, I threw myself sideways off the stool. The metal stool scraped loudly across the plastic. I hit the floor hard, my shoulder slamming down. The room spun, but I kept moving. She lunged, jabbing the syringe toward my neck. The needle caught my shirt and tore fabric, missing skin by inches. I scrambled on hands and knees. My boots slid on the plastic like I was on ice. I reached the edge of the room where an old dining chair lay tipped over, like it had been dragged there and forgotten. I grabbed it by the frame and yanked it up. She dropped the syringe and in one smooth motion snatched the scalpel from the tray. She rushed at me, blade raised. I lifted the chair as a shield. The scalpel came down and sank into the wood with a hard thunk, sticking there for a half second. That half second was everything. I shoved forward with the chair, driving it into her chest with all my strength. She flew backward as if the air had punched out of her. She hit the floor and slid across the slick plastic, arms flailing, her scrubs wrinkling and bunching as she moved. She slid right up to the radiator pipe, right up to the chain. The creature moved so fast I barely understood what I was seeing. The chain snapped tight with a horrible metallic groan. The creature lunged and dropped its long head and clamped its teeth into her shoulder and neck. Her scream wasn't a normal scream. It was wet and choking, like her throat couldn't decide whether to scream or drown. She grabbed at the creature, trying to push it away, nails digging into its skin. The creature shook its head like a dog tearing meat, and I saw the scrubs rip. I saw blood splash across the plastic. I didn't stay to see how it ended. I couldn't. I turned and ran. I sprinted to the window at the far side of the room. It was locked, painted shut, the frame stiff with old layers. There was no time to search for a key or test other exits. I raised my arms over my face and threw myself through the glass. The window exploded around me. I felt sharp pain in my arms and hands as shards cut through my jacket and skin. I hit the ground outside hard, rolling into wet weeds and mud. For a second I couldn't breathe, then I forced air in and got up. Behind me, from inside the house, there were sounds, metal clanging, a violent struggle, a scream that cut off suddenly, then a low roaring noise that made my stomach twist. I ran across the yard. The grass was slippery. The weeds grabbed at my legs. I reached my car, yanked the door open, and fell into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking so badly it took 2 tries to get the key in. When the engine finally turned over, I slammed the gas and tore away from the curb like I was escaping a fire. I drove fast. Too fast. I didn't care. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting headlights behind me, half expecting something to step out of the trees. After about half an hour, I pulled into a brightly lit gas station off a main road. The harsh fluorescent lights felt like safety. I parked under a camera, locked the doors, and sat there, breathing like I'd just sprinted miles. My arms stung. I looked down and saw thin lines of blood where glass had cut me. Nothing deep, but enough to remind me it was real. I took out my phone and called emergency services. My voice shook as I gave the address and said I heard screaming and breaking glass, that someone might be hurt. I didn't give my name. I didn't explain how I knew. I ended the call, got out, walked to a storm drain near the edge of the lot, and threw my phone into it. Then I drove to a cheap motel and paid in cash. I went into the room and turned on every light. I cleaned the cuts with a little soap from the bathroom and wrapped them with towels because I didn't have anything else. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the men on the wall and those fur-covered legs twitching slightly on the plastic. The next afternoon, still in that motel room, I turned on the TV and flipped to a local news station. The anchor looked tense, like someone who'd just been told something horrible right before going live. The report said county police had raided an isolated home after receiving a call about screams. Inside, they found a major crime scene. They said 3 missing men had been found dead, badly mutilated. They didn't show footage from inside, just shots of police cars and officers walking across an overgrown. Then the report mentioned animal control. The anchor said an aggressive, diseased animal had been found chained in the home and had to be put down. They called it a severely starved bear suffering from mange, likely wandering in and attacking the occupants. A bear. That's what they told the public. That's what people would accept. That's what made sense on paper. But the last detail made my whole body go cold. They said the homeowner, a woman believed to live there, was missing. The police searched the house, the nearby lots, the woods behind the property. They found the victims. They found the animal. But they found no trace of her. She was listed as missing, presumed to have fled before officers arrived. I turned the TV off and sat in the quiet with the motel's air conditioner rattling in the wind. My mind kept replaying the moment the creature bit her, teeth sinking into her neck, blood pouring onto her scrubs. If her story was true, if those creatures could pass whatever infection or curse they carried through saliva and bites, then she had it now. And unlike her boyfriend, she wasn't missing limbs. She wasn't chained to a pipe. Her body was in, which meant if the curse was real, she might be able to change completely. She might be able to look normal. I moved. I didn't just switch apartments. I left the city entirely. I got a new place hundreds of miles away. I changed my number. I deleted every social account I had. I stopped using matching apps. I started checking my locks twice, then 3 times. I installed a heavy deadbolt and actually used it. I stopped answering my door unless I was expecting someone. And still, the fear didn't go away. It followed me into grocery stores and coffee shops and crowded sidewalks. When someone bumped into me and apologized, my first thought wasn't no problem. It was, is that her? I look at faces constantly now. The cashier, the person in the elevator, the woman walking her dog, the man in a hoodie staring at his phone. Anyone could be wearing a human shape. Anyone could be looking back at me and recognizing me. She saw me clearly under those lights. She watched me read her charts. She heard my voice. A person who can do what she did doesn't just let something go, especially not humiliation, and especially not loss. If she survived that house and the news says she's missing, then she's out there somewhere with a reason to. And the worst part is this. If she can look like anyone, then I can't even say I'm afraid of her anymore. I'm afraid of everyone. Story 4, I'm scared to go home. Actually, I'm past scared. I don't think I'm ever going back, and I don't care that everything I own is still there. I don't care that it's my childhood house, the only home my parents ever bought, the place I used to think of as safe. I'm done with it. Whatever is in that house can keep my clothes, my books, my furniture, anything it wants. I want distance. I want air. I want to never hear that water sound again. A few months ago, I was sitting in my dorm room studying for a psychology exam when my phone started ringing. It wasn't a text or a notification. It was an actual call, which already felt strange because nobody calls anymore unless something is wrong. I remember how quiet my room was when that kind of late afternoon quiet where you can hear the building settling, someone's footsteps in the hall, a distant door closing. I was half thinking about flashcards, half thinking about dinner. "Hello?" I said, not really paying attention yet. A man's voice came through the speaker, deep and thick. The kind of voice that sounds like it belongs to someone who spends a lot of time outdoors. "Yes, am I speaking to Aaron?" Yeah, I said, sitting up. "Who is this?" "Well, ma'am, I'm Sheriff Watterson from Centerville. Your father is Roger, correct?" My throat tightened so fast it was like my body knew what was coming before my mind did. "Yes," I whispered. "Is everything okay?" There was a pause, and then I heard him exhale. Not a normal breath. A heavy sigh, like he'd done this before and hated it every time. "I'm sorry, Aaron, your dad passed away." I didn't respond right away because my brain refused to take the sentence. It tried to turn it into something else. Maybe he said he'd been in an accident. Maybe he said he was in the hospital. Maybe he said something I could fix if I just moved fast enough. But the sheriff kept talking in that careful tone people use when they're trying not to say the wrong. He told me when they found him. He told me it appeared to be an accident. He told me he was sorry. My mom had died when I was younger. Cancer, it wasn't sudden, not really. It took years. It ate away at her slowly and unfairly, and by the time she was gone, we'd already been saying goodbye in small pieces for a long time. It was horrible, but it wasn't shocking. My dad's death was different. It hit like a punch. They told me he drowned, not in a lake or a river, not in a pool, in his own house. They told me he fell asleep in the bathtub. I still don't understand how that sentence can be true and still be so wrong. 3 days after that call, I stood in a small chapel in Centerville, the kind of place people use for weddings and funerals and not much else. The air smelled like old wood and flowers that were trying too hard to hide the scent of grief. I wore a black dress that didn't feel like mine. I stood in front of a simple casket and stared at it until my eyes burned, and it hit me, hard and clear, that I was an orphan. After the service, I did what people do. I accepted hugs. I listened to stories. I nodded at the right times. People told me my dad loved me, that he was proud of me, that he talked about my school all the time. Every sentence felt like someone pressing on a bruise. That evening, my dad's lawyer sat me down in the living room. He spoke gently, but he still sounded like a lawyer, like he was reading from a script. Legal words poured over me, and I sat there in a kind of numb fog, catching only bits and pieces. Then he said something that cut through it. And finally he said, "Your father has left you the entirety of his estate, including the house." I blinked at him. "Wait, what did you say?" He repeated it like it was nothing. "Your father left you the house, as well as the majority of his earthly possessions." Oh, that was all I could manage, like my mouth had run out of real words. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a small envelope, plain and slightly worn, with my name written on it in my father's handwriting. Even in that moment, I recognized the way he made certain letters, the way his hand tilted slightly to the right. Also, the lawyer said, your father left you this. I took it and shoved it into my purse without opening it. I couldn't. I felt like if I opened it, something final would happen in my head, like closing a door I wasn't ready to close. The days after the funeral blurred together. People brought casseroles and cookies. Family members argued softly about what I should do. More than one person suggested I sell the house and use the money for school. They said it was practical. They said my parents would want me to focus on my future. They said houses were heavy responsibilities. But the idea of selling it made me sick. How could I sell the first home my parents ever bought? How could I sell the place where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway? Where my mom measured my height against the kitchen doorway? Where my dad fixed leaky faucets and complained about the price of everything while secretly loving the work? So I kept it. I transferred into an online program. I packed my dorm life into a few boxes, loaded my car, and drove back to Centerville. I told myself it would be hard, but healing. I told myself being in that house would make me feel closer to them. I told myself I'd sit in my childhood bedroom and somehow feel safe again, like a kid under blankets who believed nothing bad could cross the hallway. The first few weeks were busy. Utilities, paperwork, cleaning, endless small errands. It was almost okay when I had tasks. Grief has a way of waiting patiently until you finally sit down. And then, one evening, I realized I was alone in the house for the first time since my dad died. Everyone had gone home. The phone stopped ringing. The casseroles stopped appearing on the porch. The air felt still. Nobody tells you how loud the silence gets after a funeral. Nobody tells you how empty a house can feel when all the footsteps that used to fill it are gone. I walked from room to room without knowing what I was looking for. Every corner held a memory. My dad sitting at the table reading the paper. My mom humming softly while she cooked. Both of them laughing in the living room at some show I never thought was funny. The memories should have felt warm, but they didn't. They felt sharp because I could see them so clearly, and I knew there would never be any new ones. No more holidays with my dad. No more graduation photos. No wedding day with him walking me down the aisle. No future moments where he'd hug me and complain about how fast time was moving. That's the cruel part about grief. It doesn't just take what you had, it takes what you were supposed to have. I sat down on the floor in the hallway, my back against the wall, and cried until my head. That's when I remembered the envelope. It was still in my purse. I'd carried it for days without touching it, like it might burn me if I tried. I wiped my face with my sleeve, grabbed my purse, and pulled it out. My dad's handwriting made my chest ache immediately. It looked shaky, but still careful, like he'd been trying hard to keep it neat. I opened the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. It was one sentence. Always keep a glass of water on the nightstand. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for more words to appear. Like maybe there was a second page. Like maybe I missed something. That was it. At first, my brain didn't know what to do with the disappointment. Then anger rushed in, hot and ugly. That's it? I shouted into the empty house. My voice sounded wrong in those rooms, too loud, too desperate. That's the best advice you could think of? Thanks, Dad. Great. I'll always be hydrated. I shook the paper in my hand like it was the problem. What about, I love you? I cried. What about, I'm proud of you? What about anything that actually matters? I slid down to the floor again and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. Why did you have to go? I whispered. Why did you leave me? That night, I got drunk. Not a cute, social kind of drunk. A messy, angry, grief-soaked drunk. I drove to the liquor store like I was on autopilot and bought enough bottles to make it look like I was hosting a party. I wasn't. It was just me, trying to turn my thoughts off. At some point, I crawled into bed and collapsed. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up choking. For a second, I truly thought I was dying. I sat up fast, gagging, convinced I'd thrown up and inhaled it. My lungs felt full, heavy, like someone had poured water down my throat while I slept. I couldn't get enough air. Panic exploded through me. Then it eased just a little. My airway opened. I sucked in air like I'd been holding my breath underwater. My hands shook violently in the dark. I stumbled into the bathroom and leaned over the sink, splashing cold water onto my face. I looked up at my reflection and saw a pale, swollen-eyed version of myself staring back. And then, in the mirror, I noticed movement behind me. Not in the bathroom behind me, in the reflection of the bedroom doorway. A subtle shift in the dark, the kind your eyes catch half a second late. My scalp prickled. The hairs on my neck stood up. I turned slowly, holding a hairbrush like it was a weapon. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound normal, trying to sound like I wasn't terrified. "Is someone there?" No answer. The bedroom looked empty. Shadows pooled in corners. The bed sat exactly where it always had. My boxes were stacked against the wall. Everything looked normal, but I didn't feel normal. I stepped into the room, listening, nothing. Then I turned toward the hallway, and as I did, I heard it. A faint trickle of water. The sound was coming from the bathroom. My walk back felt like it took forever. I kept expecting something to brush my shoulder, to grab my arm, to breathe into my ear. But when I got there, it was just the sink. The faucet was running, not full blast, just a thin stream like someone hadn't turned it off all the way. My mind offered explanations. Maybe I was too drunk and didn't shut it completely. Maybe the faucet was loose. Maybe the house was old. "It's nothing," I whispered. "Just the alcohol." I locked my bedroom door and went back to bed. The next morning, I woke up with that ugly mix of headache and determination. I was embarrassed about the drinking, embarrassed about how scared I'd gotten. I told myself I was going to pull myself together. I was going to keep living. That's what my parents would want, right? I unpacked. I cleaned. I put old things into new places. I tried to make the house feel like mine instead of a museum of grief. Later, for the first time in days, I felt hungry. I walked down to the pizza place a few blocks away, the same one I worked at in high school. The owner, Billy, was there. He looked older, like everyone does when you come back home, but his eyes were the same. He came out from behind the counter and hugged me so tightly, I almost cried again. "I'm so sorry, kiddo," he said. "Thanks, Billy," I told him. "That means a lot." He held me back by my shoulders, studying my face like he was checking if I was okay. "We love you. You know you've always got a job here if you want it." I managed a small smile. "If you're serious, yeah, that would actually be great. I could use something to focus on." He nodded immediately. "Anytime. Start whenever you're ready. How's tomorrow?" "Tomorrow's great." He made me a big pepperoni pizza, and when I tried to pay, he waved me off. "On the house, kiddo. Least I can do." I carried the warm box home like it was something precious. I wish that night had been normal. I wish I could say the drowning feeling was just drunken anxiety. But it happened again and again. Every night that week, I woke up around 3 in the morning feeling like I was drowning. Every night, it got worse. Every night, the feeling lasted longer, like my body was learning the shape of panic and deciding it liked it. After a week, I couldn't take it. I didn't know what else to do, so I emailed one of my professors and asked if we could talk. Dr. Martin had always been kind. He'd encouraged me when I told him I wanted to become a psychologist. When the video call started, he looked concerned immediately, the way adults do when they're trying not to show fear. I told him everything: my mom, my dad, the call, the drowning feeling. The night I thought I saw something move, I expected him to tell me to see a doctor, to get medication, to maybe go to the ER. Instead, he listened quietly and then leaned toward the camera. "Aaron," he said carefully, "this honestly sounds a lot like grief-triggered sleep paralysis." "Sleep paralysis?" I repeated. The words felt too normal for what I was experiencing. "Yes," he said. "Your subconscious might be taking your grief and turning it into a paralysis experience that copies your father's final moments. The sensation of drowning, the panic, waking at the same time, it fits." I stared at him. Part of me felt relief. Another part felt insulted, like he was trying to put a neat label on something that didn't feel neat at all. "Is there anything that helps?" I asked. "If you want medication," he said, "I'd have to refer you. But I don't think medication is always necessary. Sometimes the mind needs closure, a sense of safety, a ritual." Closure. When we ended the call, I sat at the end of my bed thinking about that word. What did closure even mean when someone was gone? Then I thought about the envelope, the note. "Always keep a glass of water on the nightstand." I dug the paper out of my junk drawer and stared at it again. The sentence annoyed me. It felt like a joke. But if I needed a ritual, if I needed a signal to my brain that I was safe, then fine. That night, before bed, I filled a tall glass with water and set it on my nightstand. I stared at it for a while, almost daring it to matter. Then I turned off the lamp and went to sleep. I woke up in the morning and just lay there, stunned. I slept all night. No drowning feeling, no panic, no 3 a.m., choking awake. It was the most rested I'd felt since my whole body felt lighter, like I'd been carrying a heavy backpack and someone finally took it off. I went to work at the pizza place later that day, and Billy noticed right away. "You're in a good mood today," he said, smiling, glad to see it. I laughed a little. Yeah, it finally feels like I can move on. That night, I refilled the glass. Again, I slept. In the morning, I woke up smiling until I looked at the nightstand. The glass was half full. I stared at it, trying to remember if I'd woken up thirsty. I had no memory of drinking. But people do things in their sleep. I told myself I must have taken a few sips and forgotten. "Weird," I said out loud, forcing myself to shrug. Still, the unease stuck to me all day like humidity. I don't remember anything else about that day. I only remember thinking about the water. Where did it go? Why didn't I remember? That evening, I filled the glass again and made sure it was full. I even stood there for a second, measuring the level with my eyes. I slept. In the morning, the glass had less water than the night before. Not by much, but enough that I couldn't pretend it was nothing. At work, I kept zoning out, staring at nothing, while my brain ran in circles. "Everything okay, kiddo?" Billy asked, stepping close so the customers wouldn't hear. "Oh yeah, sorry," I said quickly. "Just a lot on my mind." He nodded like he understood. "If you need to talk, you know." That night I decided to stop guessing. I filled the glass and took a red marker and drew a line at the water level. I felt silly doing it, like I was turning into someone paranoid and dramatic, but I did it anyway. I went to bed. In the morning, the glass was empty, completely empty. My fear turned into anger so fast it made me dizzy. I grabbed the glass and threw it across the room. It shattered against the wall, water splashing onto the carpet like a sudden spill from a broken memory. "What the hell is going on?" I screamed at the house, at the air, at whatever was listening. For a while I stood there shaking. Then I forced myself to breathe and think like a psychology student, like a person. Before I decided anything supernatural, I needed to rule out the most obvious explanation. Sleepwalking. Maybe I was drinking the water and not remembering. Maybe grief had messed up my sleep more than I realized. Maybe I was getting up, drinking, and going back to bed like it was nothing. If that was it, I could handle it. It would be scary, but it would be fixable. I could lock the glass away. I could set alarms. I could see a specialist. So I decided to record myself. I knew my phone wouldn't film all night, and Centerville didn't have the kind of store where you could buy real security equipment. But I used a voice memo app to record lectures, and I knew it could run for hours. If I couldn't see it, I could at least hear it. That night I filled a glass of water and started the voice memo recording. Then I hesitated and filled 3 more glasses, too. 4 total, lined up on the nightstand. My logic was simple. If I was the one drinking in my sleep, 4 full glasses would mean I'd have to get up to use the bathroom. The discomfort would wake me. Or I'd at least remember. I fell asleep. In the morning, all 4 glasses were empty. My hands were sweaty as I grabbed my phone and played back the recording. At first, it was just the soft sounds of a quiet room and my own breathing. I skipped ahead, speeding it up. Then, around 3 a.m., the sound changed. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't a door. It wasn't the creak of floorboards. It was drinking. Not normal drinking. Not a person taking sips. It sounded like something huge and thirsty pulling down water in loud, violent gulps. Like an animal at a trough. Like lips and mouth working too fast, too desperate. The sound lasted about 30 seconds. Then it stopped. The rest of the recording was only my breathing again. I sat there frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. That sound couldn't have been me. Even if I sleepwalked, even if I drank in my sleep, I couldn't make that sound without waking up. I needed proof I could see. So I called Billy and told him I was sick and couldn't come in. He sounded concerned and told me to rest. Then I got in my car and drove to the nearest city with a store that sold home security cameras. The drive took 45 minutes, and every minute of it felt like I was leaving something behind and also being followed. At the store, a young employee greeted me with a bright, normal smile, and the normalcy made me want to cry. "Hi," he said. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need a home security camera, night vision, something I can check from my phone." He nodded and walked me to a shelf with a few options. I chose the cheapest one because I didn't want to stand there any longer than I had to. I wanted to get back, set it up, and know. I hated myself for it, but I had to know. He explained the app and the Wi-Fi connection, and I nodded like I was listening. I paid, went back to my car, and drove home. When my father's house came into view, I almost didn't pull into the driveway. The place looked the same as it always had, same siding, same windows, same yard, but it felt unfamiliar. Like a copy of the house I grew up in. Like something had moved in and was wearing my childhood-like clothing. I went inside and felt nothing. No warmth, no comfort, just dread. I set up the camera in my bedroom, angling it so it could see the bed and the nightstand. I checked the feed on my phone. It worked. The image was clear. The little night vision setting made everything look pale and wrong, but at least it worked. Then I walked to the local pharmacy and bought sleeping pills, because I honestly didn't believe I could fall asleep on my own. The place was small and dusty, lit by fluorescent lights that gave everything a sick green tint. An older man stood behind the counter and smiled at me with the kind of harmless friendliness that should have made me feel safe. "Hello, young lady," he said. "Find everything?" "Yes, sir," I answered. He looked at the pills as he put them in a small bag. "Trouble sleeping, ma'am?" I nodded. "Yeah, you could say that well," he said gently. "Hopefully these help." "Take care now, you too," I said, and left with the bag tight in my hand. That night, I filled a glass of water to the brim. I checked the camera feed one more time. Then I took 2 pills and climbed into bed with my heart beating hard, like my body knew it was making a mistake. I turned off the lamp. Morning came, and I woke up feeling better than I had in weeks. The sleep was deep and heavy, the kind that knocks you out completely. For one bright second, I forgot. Then I saw the empty glass. All the fear fell back onto me at once, like someone dropped a wet blanket over my shoulders. I didn't even change out of my pajamas. I grabbed my phone and walked outside onto the porch because I couldn't stand being in the bedroom while I watched. I needed space and daylight and air. I connected to the camera. The view showed my bedroom in black and white night vision. I watched myself asleep at fast speed. Nothing happened for hours. The room stayed still. It almost looked peaceful. Then the timestamp hit 3:01 a.m. Something moved. Not at the door. Not in the closet. From under my bed. A shape slid out like smoke, smooth and quiet, like it didn't have bones at all. It was tall, too tall. When it finally stood up, it had to bend, because its head and shoulders pressed against the ceiling. Its back faced the camera. It was wet, like it had crawled out of water, and it was so thin I could count every ridge of its spine. The skin looked tight over bones. Its arms hung too long, reaching below its knees. It didn't rush. It didn't act like a wild animal. It moved slowly, calmly, like it belonged there more than I did. It reached for the glass on the nightstand. The cup looked tiny in its hand. It lifted it to its mouth, and even through the camera I could hear it loud sucking, like it was pulling the water down fast, like it couldn't taste anything but thirst. When it finished, it lowered the empty glass and turned its head toward my sleeping body. I watched it stand there and stare at me, and I felt my throat closing like I was the one being squeezed. Then it raised one hand and touched my hair. Not roughly, almost gently. Its fingers moved through my hair, down the side of my face, slow and careful, like it was learning my shape. One claw pressed into my cheek hard enough to break the skin. In the video, I stirred. My mouth moved. I mumbled. And then I heard my sleeping voice say the words that made my stomach drop, "Dad? Is that you?" The creature stayed still for a beat. Then its shoulders shook. It laughed, but it wasn't a normal laugh. It was wet and choking, like something was clogged in its throat, like it was enjoying a joke only it understood. And then, in a creaking voice that sounded wrong coming from any throat, it answered, mocking me. Yes, it said. It's me. In the video, my sleeping voice responded like a child. I missed you so much, Dad. The thing bent over me. It lowered its face close and kissed my forehead. Then it slipped back under the bed, smooth and silent, like it had never been there at all. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled off the porch and into the yard. My stomach rolled so hard I thought I might throw up. I couldn't make myself look back at the house. I couldn't make myself go inside and grab anything, not even my keys at first. I just wanted space, miles, anything. I got in the car and drove. I'm hours away now, writing this from a hotel room in another state. I've been staring at my hands like they belong to someone else. I keep touching my cheek where the claw cut me. The scratch is real. It burns when I press. There is no explanation that makes it go away. I told myself I'm never going back. But the worst part is, I think it knows I left. I've been watching the camera feed from my phone anyway, even though it makes my skin crawl. About 30 minutes ago, it crawled out from under the bed again. It didn't go to the nightstand this time. It just stood up slowly, filling the bending under the ceiling like a person forced into a space too small for them. And then it turned its face directly toward the camera. Since then, it hasn't moved, not an inch. It's just staring into the lens like it's staring into me, like it knows exactly where I am, even without leaving the room. Its eyes are the worst thing I've ever seen. Pure black, with tiny white pupils, like pinpoints. It hasn't blinked once. It's getting late. I don't want to sleep. I'm terrified that if I close my eyes, I'll wake up choking again, lungs full of water, hands grabbing at sheets like they're the surface of a pool. And I can't stop thinking about my dad. He fell asleep in the bathtub, they said. But now I keep seeing that thing bending over my bed, drinking my water, touching my face, laughing when I called it Dad. And I can't make my brain stop asking the question I don't want to ask. If I don't go back, it stays there. If I do go back, it might not.